Hello and welcome to the France 24 interview. Our guest today is the United Nations Special Envoy on Climate Change, Mary Robinson. You're also the founder of the Mary Robinson Foundation, Climate Justice. Thank you very much for being on the show.
Very happy to be here.
There was recently a major meeting at the United Nations on climate change. We heard lots of speeches, some commitments. Is there really momentum on this issue because we've seen previous negotiations fail?
Yes, I think there really is momentum, partly because of the enormous climate march, not just in New York, but in events all around the world. That did infect the mood in the UN. I've been at lots of meetings in the UN. This one had a different mood. And countries did come to commit, but some committed more specifically than others. Even small island states like Samoa and Ethiopia committed to go to carbon neutrality much more quickly. And, countries committed, but not enough, to the Green Climate Fund, because we do need finance for resilience and adaptation. And overall, I think it mobilized the world that climate has to be addressed, but we need more transformative leadership. We're beginning to get there, but I think we're going to have to keep up this mobilization and keep pushing and pressing to Lima and then to Paris.
Right. In Lima in December is the next round of negotiations.
The next conference, yes.
And in Paris at the end of next year, there is supposed to be an agreement. Are you confident there will be a strong and binding agreement?
Well, first of all, I'm glad about Paris personally, because Paris is the home, remember, of human rights. The Universal Declaration of Human Rights was signed there. And we've many times commemorated that, and the 10th of December will be during the conference. So I'm hoping that we will have a people-centered approach. And I do think that countries are far more aware that we need a binding agreement. We're going to have a draft text in Lima at the conference in Peru in this December, and a whole year for negotiation. That's very different from Copenhagen, where we didn't know what was going to happen out of Copenhagen. So there's a lot more planning and a lot more determination among so many countries that we cannot now postpone further getting a decision.
Obviously, this means that the so-called big countries in the climate change issue, like the United States, China, India, the European Union, all step up to the plate. Obviously, there's been criticism that the United States was not doing enough, that China was not doing enough, that India was not doing enough. Is this still the case, or is this changing?
Well, you mentioned the European Union. Let's start with that. Right. A very, very important European Council meeting will take place in October. And we have, after all, a momentum from the climate march, from the summit, from the commitments made, from the partnerships announced on so many different areas of green bonds and cities coming together, etc. So there's an excitement about climate. And the European Union leaders will come together in October and, I believe, must adopt the package that the Commission has put forward for a 40% reduction in emissions and for targets on both renewable energy and energy efficiency. It's quite doable. It's not easy, but it's doable in European terms. And it will give a trust momentum into those negotiations. And the EU played a vital role in Durban when South Africa had the chair of the Conference of the Parties and got us what's called the Durban Enhanced Platform that every country has to commit now to working towards the Paris Agreement. And I think that the EU and many other countries will be forging a progressive alliance and widening the circle to include the Indias and the Chinas and the Brazils and the United States, rather than, as was in Copenhagen, where the big countries picked up the pieces of there being no obvious text to agree on and came out with the Copenhagen Accords. I think it will be more an intensive negotiation, and I think that's also better because it has to be owned by all countries.
Right, including China and the US?
Including China and the US, and I do believe we're in a much better place with China and the US. It's quite clear that President Obama understands the importance of addressing climate change, as does his Secretary of State, John Kerry. It's quite clear that China, for its own reasons internally and globally, understands the need to move on climate.
So you're confident there will be an agreement next year in Paris?
I am, what Archbishop Tutu says, I'm a prisoner of hope, but I really do hope, and I'm more than hope. I think there is every reason to believe now that we are going to get a good climate agreement, but we will need to know that we must measure and review it constantly so that it takes us on a pathway that we stay below 2 degrees Celsius. We're not on course for that, and Paris has to change course, and that's not easy. And Some countries are fully aware and making the commitment because they're affected already by climate change. We need all countries to do what is necessary, particularly the bigger emitters and the historic emitters, the countries, the industrialized countries who benefited from fossil fuel.
If that doesn't happen?
There is no plan B, as the Secretary General said, and I think that's what was important in the summit. The voices that we heard at the plenary, the warning that we heard from my sister elder, Graça Michel, at the end. You have done well, but not well enough, she said, more or less. You have made commitments, but we need now to see that you will have to do more, and you will need courage. I don't know how many times she repeated in her speech the word courage. And that's what we need from leaders. To lead not to the next election or by-election or midterm elections a few months away, but to lead for the next century, for our children and grandchildren.
Right. Obviously, you have been very involved all your life in human rights. I mean, your career is long. You were former president of Ireland. You were former UN High Commissioner for Human Rights. And you consider that climate change is a human rights issue. That's not obvious.
I consider it the biggest human rights issue facing the world.
Why?
And I came to climate from that perspective because I was working in African countries on right to health, on women, peace and security issues, on corporate responsibility. And everywhere I went in Africa, people said to me, but things are so much worse. And when I asked, how do you mean? They would say, the rainy seasons don't come anymore. We have long periods of drought and then flash flooding and then more drought, and our school has been destroyed. We have no idea, what's going to happen. We can't plant, we can't sow. It is affecting food security in African countries. I was in Samoa about a month ago with the Secretary General at the World Conference of the Small Island Developing States, and I heard leaders from those countries, basically with tears in their eyes, saying, we are watching our countries disappearing. Don't you care? And so there's been a bit of a disconnect, but now because of Sandy in the United States, drought in California, floods in Europe, we're beginning to understand. But we really need our leaders to look at the science and give us leadership. And I'm very glad that the French presidency is giving that leadership. It was quite clear that President Hollande, who announced $1 billion for the Green Climate Fund, does understand the need for that leadership.
Nevertheless, there is distrust by the developing countries who are saying, why should the rich world be trusted? They benefited from this dirty, quote-unquote, energy. We also should for our development, and they're not going to do us any favor. Why should there be some trust?
In a way, that distrust is different. I was very interested to see that the developing countries are actually moving faster than the developed countries in moving towards clean energy. And that's really very encouraging. Not all of them, but I mentioned Ethiopia, very remarkably. Mexico has contributed $10 million to the Global Green Climate Fund as a developing country. So I sense that in a way, the poorer and developing countries are saying, we have to move and we're moving. You lot caused this problem, start moving quickly. You know, it's a different sort of dynamic. And we do need more trust, and trust comes from financing. And it is good that there was a lot of interest in investment in clean energy, green bonds, a lot of things happening that aren't strictly within the conference of the parties, which will end up in Paris, but will help an environment to create more trust because there's more support for developing countries, more attention to the effect on people.
Right. Is the corporate world also changing? We hear announcements, but not everyone believes that they are truly involved in this.
Well, in a way, there are almost two corporate worlds, aren't there? There's the corporate world that is the fossil fuel corporate world, and I don't think they're changing much, and I think they are a big part of the problem. And that's why even the announcement of philanthropists like the Rockefeller Brothers Fund divesting from fossil fuel in New York, just at the time of the climate summit, was really important. And the mobilizing worldwide that's going on, that we have to get out of fossil fuel and into renewables. Now, you're right that this poses a problem for poorer countries, and we have to have equity in this and space. But the more we can transfer the clean technologies to developing countries rapidly, the quicker we'll all get to where we need to be. Look at what the mobile phone has done for Africa. I mean, they've leapfrogged into a communications tool of enormous importance. They need to leapfrog into the 1.3 billion who have no electricity and who pay too much for candles and kerosene to get clean energy. And we need to see that climate change isn't just a negative. On the contrary, the report of the Calderon Commission recommended that every country should take steps because it's in their interests. And I think that was a little bit in the minds of some of the leaders.
I just want to go quickly to a region that you followed a lot, the Middle East.
Yes.
There's a lot of chaos, there's war again, there was war in Gaza, there's war in Syria, in Iraq. How do you feel about it?
I was with my fellow elders, Gro Brundtland, Graça Machel, Marty Ahtisaari, during the climate summit in New York, and we also had some meetings, including with President Abbas, on this issue. We are very concerned about the wider Middle East issues, the terrible divides that are opening up, the savagery of what's happening to populations there, and the need to remind us that we are human beings who should be learning to live better together on this world and inject some of the values, even of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. This is the universal standard we should hold ourselves to. It is being undermined by this terrible violence and hatred, and indeed some of the military response. We have to get a better way of addressing those issues.
You think the military response is wrong?
I don't say it's wrong. I think it's extremely difficult, but I think we need to understand that since the Iraq War, which I've totally opposed, we have problems, and we have to go deeper and understand the cultural change that is taking place in perceptions, which is having young people going from even European countries to sign up to fight and kill as many people as possible in the name of an Islam which isn't Islam. It's a distortion of that religion.
Thank you very much, Mary Robinson, for sharing your thoughts with us, and thank you for watching this interview here on France 24.